operating system that is in everyone's mouth when recommending where to start your Linux journey. It has gained a reputation of being the ultimate newbie-friendly distribution.
To choosing a Linux distribution for your new operating system, Linux Mint is usually one of the most common ones to be recommended to you.
Nobody predicted it would be Linux Mint, not Ubuntu, the distribution that tech journalists default to when covering Linux adoption.
I know personally, I have people in my own Discord who have switched over to Linux and they swear by it.
Not Fedora, which carries the credibility of Red Hat backing. Not Arch, which the developer community treats as a rite of passage. Linux Mint, a distribution that the majority of Windows users had never encountered 6 months ago. A project run by a small team with no corporate parent, no marketing budget, and no enterprise sales force. That distribution has now accumulated 87 million active users, up from 4 million in September 2025, 22 times growth in 6 months. And the monthly installation rate is not slowing down. It is accelerating. What Linux Mint did to achieve this is not technically impressive in the conventional sense. It did not build a superior kernel. It did not invent new security architecture. It did not solve problems that other distributions had failed to solve. It did something more strategically devastating than any of that. It gave Windows users back the interface Microsoft took away from them 12 years ago and refused to return. The download trajectory is worth reading slowly, because the numbers carry information about momentum that summary statistics obscure. September 2025, 380,000 downloads. October, 1.2 million. November, 3.8 million. December, 8.4 million. January 2026, 14.7 million. Each month between 2 and 3 times the month before it, during the initial acceleration phase, then stabilizing into a monthly growth rate of 20 to 25%, as the base became large enough that percentage growth naturally moderated. Total cumulative downloads across those 6 months, 46.8 million. Ubuntu, the largest and most recognized Linux distribution in the world, recorded 17.3 million downloads across all of 2025. Linux Mint surpassed Ubuntu's entire annual download figure in 6 months of accelerating migration. The Linux Mint project's analysis of installation to download ratios, accounting for deployments across multiple machines from a single download in school and business environments, estimated actual installations at approximately 86.6 million. Active user base as of March 2026, 87 million. The projection line for the months ahead, if current growth rates hold, puts Linux Mint past 150 million active users by June 2026. That would place it above macOS in global active user count. The geographic distribution of that growth confirms this is not a regional story driven by a single government mandate or localized market condition. North America accounts for 23 million users, representing 26% of the total. Europe holds 28 million at 32%. Asia has 24 million at 28%. South America contributes 8 million at 9%. Every continent is experiencing the same pattern at the same time. The cause is consistent across all of them, and it is not Linux Mint doing anything differently in different markets. It is Windows doing the same things badly in every market simultaneously. Hardware requirements locking out functional machines. Forced AI integration degrading performance. Privacy architecture creating compliance exposure. A mandatory upgrade path requiring expenditure that users in every income bracket and every geography find unjustifiable for hardware that works fine. The interface strategy behind Linux Mint's success is not complicated to explain, but its effectiveness is difficult to overstate. Linux Mint's default desktop environment, Cinnamon, was built deliberately to replicate the Windows 7 layout with precision. Start menu in the bottom left corner. Classic application list rather than tiled interface. Taskbar running across the bottom with pinned applications. System tray in the bottom right with volume, network, and battery indicators. File manager with a left sidebar showing drives and folder hierarchy. Windows that minimize, maximize, and close with buttons positioned in the top right corner. Alt-Tab task switching that behaves identically to the Windows equivalent. Side-by-side screenshots of Windows 7 and Linux Mint Cinnamon are nearly indistinguishable to a user who is not looking carefully. The color scheme differs. The logo in the corner is different. The icons have subtle distinctions. The layout, the behavior, the workflow logic, and the muscle memory required to navigate it are the same. Users who installed Windows 7 in 2009 and built a decade of computing habits around it sit down at Linux Mint and their hands know what to do without consulting a tutorial. That matters because Windows 7 was the last version of Windows that users actually wanted. Survey data from the period when it was the current platform showed satisfaction ratings around 67%. Windows 8 dropped to 23% as Microsoft replaced the start menu with a touch-optimized tile interface designed for tablets and deployed it on desktop machines. Windows 10 recovered to 41%, but introduced the telemetry architecture and cloud integration pressure that began eroding user trust. Windows 11 sits at 28% satisfaction in current surveys, below Windows 8 at its most despised. Microsoft has been losing the satisfaction argument consistently for over a decade. Users have been tolerating progressively worse interfaces because the alternative required learning an unfamiliar platform. Linux Mint eliminated that requirement. It copied the last interface users genuinely liked and made it available for free on hardware that Windows 12 will refuse to run. The calculus changed completely. The migration tooling Linux Mint developed removes the final barrier that had historically made switching impractical for non-technical users. The Mint Migration Assistant handles the entire transition automatically. It backs up the user's Windows files across documents, photos, videos, and downloads to an external drive or network location. It creates a bootable Linux Mint installer. It partitions the drive with an option to preserve Windows for dual booting or replace it entirely based on user preference. It installs Linux Mint with all required drivers and current updates. It restores user files to the Linux Mint home directory, while preserving the folder structure the user was familiar with. It installs Linux equivalents for the Windows applications the user had been running. It configures email accounts, browser bookmarks, and printer settings automatically. The entire process runs in 45 to 90 minutes depending on data volume. The user answers a small number of questions at the beginning, steps away, and returns to a fully configured Linux Mint installation with their files, their settings, and their familiar folder structure in place. No terminal commands, no manual driver installation, no configuration work requiring technical knowledge. The intimidation that kept non-technical users on Windows despite their frustration with it has been systematically dismantled. The user accounts that circulated through forums, social media, and video platforms during the migration wave tell a consistent story regardless of geography or technical background. A small business owner in Ohio who had refused to leave Windows 7 until Microsoft forced her off it by ending support, tried Windows 10, disliked it, tried Windows 11, disliked it more, installed Linux Mint on the recommendation of a friend, and described the experience as returning home. A company with 340 Windows 11 workstations, whose IT administrator migrated the entire fleet to Linux Mint over 3 weeks and reported that support tickets dropped 81%. Users described their computers as finally working correctly, and the administrator's own workload decreased to a level that had not been possible under Windows. A 71-year-old retiree in Ireland, who had used Windows 7 for years, been forced to Windows 10, found that everything she knew how to do had moved and spent years feeling lost on her own computer, had Linux Mint installed by her grandson, and said it was exactly like the Windows 7 she remembered, and that she could use her computer again without feeling stupid. A school in India managing 180 2018 computers that Windows 11 would not install on due to TPM requirements, with no budget for replacement hardware, deployed Linux Mint across the entire fleet. Students noticed no meaningful difference. Teachers adapted within days. The institution avoided a capital expense that would have been impossible to fund. The common element in every account is not technical sophistication or ideological commitment to open source. It is the discovery that the interface they had always known still existed, had always existed, and was available for free on the hardware Microsoft said was obsolete. The community infrastructure that grew around Linux Mint's migration wave amplified adoption in ways that no single organization could have engineered deliberately. Over 47,000 YouTube tutorials covering Windows to Linux Mint migration appeared across the acceleration period. The most viewed carry 5 to 10 million views each, and are produced in plain language aimed at ordinary users rather than developers. Facebook groups dedicated to Windows refugees moving to Linux Mint accumulated memberships in the millions. The largest groups see hundreds of posts daily with thousands of responses. The tone documented consistently across these communities is supportive and welcoming in ways that distinguish them from the technical gatekeeping historically associated with Linux communities. Users who post that they want to leave Windows but are frightened receive dozens of encouraging responses within minutes, with tutorial links, offers to walk through the process together, and reassurance from people who made the same transition recently. The community is not evangelizing Linux as a philosophy. It is helping Windows users who are already frustrated find a way out and then stay out. Word of mouth in that environment spreads faster than any advertising campaign. Satya Nadella addressed Linux Mint directly on the February 2026 earnings call, when an analyst asked how Microsoft planned to respond to a distribution that had reached 87 million users predominantly from Windows defections. Nadella's answer stated that Microsoft respected user choice and that Windows 11 served hundreds of millions who appreciated its modern interface and AI-powered features, while users preferring different approaches had many options available. The The practical translation of that response is that Microsoft has categorized the tens of millions of users choosing Linux Mint as acceptable losses in the pursuit of a platform direction that those users have already voted against with their behavior. That framing reveals the core of Microsoft's strategic problem. The users leaving are not leaving because they want cutting-edge AI features on different hardware. They are leaving because they want the interface and the reliability that Microsoft had before it decided those things were incompatible with its business model. Dismissing their departure as a choice Microsoft respects, rather than a failure Microsoft needs to understand, is a posture that guarantees the outflow continues. The hardware manufacturer responses to Linux Mint's growth data reinforced the same conclusion from a different angle. Dell, which had already moved Linux to the default on the majority of its lineup and had shipped its most powerful AI workstation on Ubuntu, first at CES 2026, pointed to Linux Mint's numbers as validation of the direction it had already chosen. System76, the Linux-focused manufacturer, attributed its 340% sales growth in the fourth quarter of 2025 directly to Windows refugees, discovering that hardware Microsoft had designated as incompatible with its upgrade path ran Linux faster than it had ever run Windows. The OEM community that Microsoft depends on to ship its platform into the market was watching Linux Mint's trajectory and drawing operational conclusions about where the consumer hardware business was heading. The projection that Linux Mint could surpass macOS in active users by June 2026 would represent a structural shift in the desktop OS landscape that reverses 30 years of platform hierarchy. macOS built its 140 million active user base over decades with premium hardware integration, a carefully curated software ecosystem, and consistent user satisfaction scores that no Windows version since Windows 7 has approached. Linux Mint is closing that gap in 6 months by doing the opposite of everything Microsoft has done since Windows 7. No forced interface changes, no mandatory cloud integration, no AI features that consume resources for capabilities users did not request, no hardware requirements that make functional machines obsolete, free licensing that eliminates cost as a barrier, migration tools that eliminate technical skill as a barrier, a community that eliminates isolation as a barrier. Every structural advantage Microsoft built its monopoly on has been systematically neutralized. What remains is the interface question. And on the interface question, Linux Mint's answer is the one 67% of Windows users gave a satisfaction rating to in 2009 and have been trying to get back ever since. Bill Gates built Microsoft's consumer dominance on a straightforward proposition. Windows would make personal computing accessible, productive, and reliable for ordinary people. Every Windows version since Windows 7 has moved further from that proposition. Linux Mint moved toward it, deliberately, specifically, and without apology. 87 million users in 6 months is not a migration statistic. It is a verdict on which operating system is currently honoring the original Windows promise more faithfully than Windows itself. Microsoft has no answer to that verdict. That does not require admitting the direction it chose was wrong. And every day it declines to make that admission. 18 to 22 million more users find Linux Mint, install it, discover that their computers work the way they remember computers working, and stop being Microsoft's users permanently.